And so before we get started, it would be really wonderful if you guys could tell us using the chat function who you are, where you're from, and why you've decided to join us. And if you would like to, you can certainly use and share your Instagram handle. So I'm going to switch over to chat, and hopefully I can start to see some of you guys introducing yourselves for the next few minutes. Okay. Nobody yet, but I can certainly see that we have the wonderful London Tech Ladies joining us. So I can see Polly and Saba, and who else have we got on here? Melanie, I can see that we've got there. We've got our speakers waiting to join us too. So Saba, thank you. Saba's joining us from London. The heat wave is well and truly over. Polly, who is one of the founders of London Tech Ladies, she's joining us from Stratford in East London. Yasmin, welcome. Hello from Essex. Melanie's joining us too, from London too. I'm actually based out in Kent at the moment, in the middle of the countryside, and it's pretty cloudy, and I'm hoping for some sunshine. Hi Francis. So Francis is joining us from London. Alex, who is one of my wonderful friends from old, is joining us from Suffolk. Jacqueline says that she's joining from a chilly Bromley. Nancy's joined us from Essex, and she's joined the session out of curiosity. So thank you, Nancy, for joining us, and hopefully you're going to take some great stuff from today. We've got, apologies if I'm not saying your name right, but we've got Nevi from Croydon, and Pamela, another person from Kent. So hi to my fellow Kent person. I've got Mel from the US, but London based. Wow, I thought we had our first international joinee then. So fabulous, and welcome to you. We have Gray. She's a YouTuber working on a project for anti-racism from Australia, and looking to learn more about anti-racism. So Gray, hopefully we can answer any questions that you have. And Julia, we have from sunny Worthing in Sussex. So thank you, Julia, for joining us from sunny Worthing too. We've got Jay here from London, and has joined the event because she's been working for many years to try and make the creative industries more inclusive and diverse. So that's a topic very close to one of our speakers' hearts, and something that I think you're going to hear a lot about today, and supporting those underrepresented in the industry. So that's absolutely all of what we're trying to talk about through today's event. So thank you everybody for joining. I'm just going to leave it for just a couple more minutes for everybody else to join, and we will then certainly be getting started. So anybody else like to share why they've joined, or what they're hoping to get out of today? It would be fantastic to hear what today really means to you guys. Also, something to be thinking about ahead of us getting started is any questions that you may have, and I'll come on to those during the kind of housekeeping rules, but please think about questions that you want to ask. You can ask them totally anonymously, and Rosemarie and Elijah are more than happy to answer your questions after the session. So 1 minute left on our countdown, and then we shall be getting started. We have 45 people already lined up and joining us, which is brilliant. So thank you, everybody. Okay. Oh, we've got some new joiners, which is fantastic. Tessa from Hackney, and Tessa says she's looking to join as she would like new and better ways and approaches on how to tackle racism, rather than wishing I'd done something differently afterwards. Tessa, thank you for your honesty, because I think we definitely all feel that way too. And I definitely know I look back and think I wish I'd tackled things differently. So thank you. Jay, thank you for your contribution too. Any advice on how to tackle the conversations when speaking with people with biased and racist views? and she says she sometimes leaves a conversation and thinks afterwards, I should have said this. So definitely, that's definitely something that we will be tackling after. And Jay, if you wouldn't mind putting that onto the question and answer chat, that would be fantastic. Okay, so moving on to get started with our session. So today, oh, let me go back. Can't go back. Oh, here we go. So today is all about supercharging your journey towards anti-racism. So thank you for joining us today to discuss our journey. There's been recent atrocious events such as the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, which has provided inevitable traction to the Black Lives Matter movement, both here and internationally, and has heightened global attention to the prejudice which still exists towards Black people. I'm sorry to say that prior to the research for this event, that I didn't fully understand the level to which racism still exists within modern society. It's shocking. And it's made me realise that we really do need to take responsibility for our lack of awareness of what so many people in society are experiencing on a day-to-day basis, and to take the steps to educate ourselves better. So racial biases, whether explicit or subconscious, are all around us, and it's long overdue for us to take the steps to do the work to become actively anti-racist. Today's event is small, but it's important to move us forward in our understanding of where racism exists within society and how we can all individually play our part in eradicating it. We need to use today to fuel our motivation to make positive change. So a few housekeeping rules. Please make sure you are muted. You might hear my 18-month-old son screaming in the background shortly, so I may have to mute myself too at some points. This is a totally safe and non-judgmental space, and that's really, really important because we want you to be really honest and to ask those burning questions that you want to know. As we've said, today is about educating yourselves. So please don't feel that it's a silly question. I guess the key thing to remember is, are you asking the question with good intent? And if you are, please put it forward. I know during the course of this research, there's certainly been questions that I've been nervous or scared to ask Rosemarie and Elijah, who, by the way, are two of the most welcoming people you could ever meet. And they've been fully embracing of my questions, no matter how silly I thought they were. So please put them forward. We really are not here to judge, but we are here to learn together. But I do need to mention that we do have a zero tolerance policy towards aggressive and disrespectful behaviour, of which I'm sure we're not going to see any of today. So just to briefly introduce you guys to London Tech Ladies, if this is your first time joining, we are a wonderful community of over 4,000 members. We host monthly events like today, which is really around soft skills development. We provide workshops with the aim and the intention to aid your self-development, to give you the leadership skills that you need to help with your career planning, and ultimately to provide a strong network for self-empowerment. So with no further ado, I am now going to hand over to our first fabulous speaker, Elijah. Elijah is the Communications and Public Affairs Manager at Google. He's also the author of The Clapback, which is a book I highly, highly recommend. It's a definitive guide to calling out the racial stereotypes. He champions getting more diverse individuals into creative industries. So I'm now going to hand over to Elijah. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah, and huge thank you to London Tech Ladies for the opportunity to speak to you all, and thank you all for coming on this call today. I'm really excited to be having this conversation with you all because there's so many intersectionalities within our community, and I mean that broadly as human community and human society. And I really, really want to take the opportunity to speak to different groups within those intersectionalities. So being able to speak to a group of amazing women, and I know we're very diverse within this group, so it's not just women, but being able to speak to predominantly amazing women in the tech space, of which I also kind of inhabit, is a huge opportunity. And I just want to thank you all for coming on this call. And just to kind of reiterate what Hannah said, I think for the next hour, we should give ourselves permission to be ignorant, to be able to acknowledge that they're just things that we don't know. And I am looking forward to sharing my insights, but also learning from you all. And I think the best way for me to do that at scale is to learn from your questions and some of the amazing insights and questions that you may have. So just to kind of sum it up, thank you all for being here, and I'm really excited and looking forward to getting in more to some of the issues.
Great. Thank you, Elijah. So Elijah, would you like to talk through your experiences, and then we'll hand over to Rosemarie.
Absolutely. So I saw in the chat that someone within the group was born or brought up in Nigeria. I was born in London, but I lived in Nigeria from the ages of 6 to 14. And when I came back to the UK, it was a very interesting viewpoint that I had, because I had been in an area and I'd spent most of my formative years in a country where everyone was black. So my blackness was almost removed from the situation. If I were good at basketball, it wasn't because I was black. It was just because I was good at basketball, because everyone else was black. And, if I was poor at a particular subject in school, it wasn't because I was black, because everyone else was black. It was just because I was poor at that subject. So, the comfort of being able to be judged on your own merits and your own failures was something that I came back to the UK with. And it was hugely shocking to me when I came back to the UK as a teenager and realized how much the color of my skin had an impact into how I was viewed and what opportunities were available to me. And then as I started to get older, it just started to become more and more prevalent. And that's kind of what caused me, or inspired me rather, to write the Clapback, because as a black person, I know that the stereotypes are not true. But also, I don't need to be a black person in order to know that those stereotypes are not true. A really good example that I always use is there's this stereotype that black people are really good runners, and there's just very, very good runners. Why would the color of my skin have anything to do with how fast my muscles can move? The equivalent of that would be, oh, this red Ferrari is faster than this blue Ferrari. Why would the paint job have any impact on how powerful the engine is? And so, what I do in this book is start to ask people to really critically examine some of the beliefs and stereotypes that they hold, not only just from a historical perspective or from an anthropological perspective, but just kind of from a common sense. Because the moment you start to think of it, you go, yeah, of course, like, why would the color of his skin, which is absolutely nothing other than a consequence of ultraviolet light, have anything at all to do with how fast our muscles can move? And then you start to examine it a little bit further, and then you go, oh, well, if you look at the Olympics and you look at lots of sporting activities, races tend to be won by black people. But then you critically examine that even more and say, okay, they tend to be won by people in Jamaica, or long distance running by people in Kenya. Those are 2 countries out of the 50 countries. Well, actually, Jamaica is not even in Africa. So Kenya is 1 country in Africa and Jamaica is in the Caribbean. So those are 2 countries across the whole sort of world in which black people tend to live and are born in. So then it asks you to sort of critically examine that. So to kind of sum it up, my journey was for me to understand why people think of these stereotypes the way they do, but also to educate people to start debunking these stereotypes. And that kind of brought me to writing the book.
Thank you, Elijah. During the conversations that we had for this event, you shared some of the work that you've been doing with traditionally white male middle class institutions, and it was certainly very eye-opening for me. Could you perhaps share that with our audience and what that kind of meant for you?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I tend to get these organizations to think about is to examine their creation and their makeup. Because if you exist in an environment that, excuse me, that privileges you, and you look around and everyone is similar to you, everyone has similar upbringing, similar accents, they're similar races, similar education, then it's very difficult for you to see that nothing is wrong because everyone is comfortable. And a lot of these organizations that have white middle class men at the top or are highly populated by white middle class men is actually that this ethos is in part of their creation. You know, if you think about startups typically, and it's only recently that this has changed, but typically startups were, you know, kind of wealthy or middle class white men who maybe left a tech company or left a financial company and maybe not necessarily have a lot at stake. And then they hire their friends and they hire their friends. And then, you know, because there is no diversity in the makeup of the company, it ends up growing in a way that diversity is not at the core. And so what I always encourage these companies to do is unpick their history and unpick their values to ensure that actually diversity is at the core of their institution. Very recently, the CEO of Wells Fargo said that the reason why there are not a lot of Black people at senior level was because they just weren't getting enough CVs and there are not enough Black people at that level in their industry, which is, of course, 100% false. The very idea that white people are just inherently more business savvy or inherently more available in the market, it's false. There are two reasons why, and obviously I don't know the makeup of their company, but if I were to theorize, I would say there were two reasons why they didn't have senior Black people within their organization. One is because they don't want to, because if they did, they would go out and find them. And two, it's because their industry or indeed their company does not foster inclusion. So even if they do manage to get Black people within that company, those Black people wouldn't want to stay. And as a Black person, I can 100% guarantee this. Like whenever any other Black person talks to me about a job, outside of how much they pay, my second question is, are there any other Black people there? Or, you know, how do they treat Black people? So it's it's not entirely surprising to me, but it's very disappointing to me to hear the CEO of a huge company say that.
Elijah, I totally agree. There's a fantastic person on Instagram, The Unconscious Kid, which I recommend for anyone to follow, who said exactly what you've just said there, that you have to take responsibility for it. Just saying that you haven't had enough people applying is not enough. You need to be more proactive and do something about it. I know we're not moved on to the Q&A section, this section just yet, but there's a burning question, I think, well, two burning questions that I'd like to ask you before we move on to Rosemarie. The first is, what could men be doing to be more supportive in this environment? So if you wouldn't mind answering that, and then I'm going to actually ask you a question that Jay actually asked earlier on.
So to answer the question about
what could men be doing to be more supportive?
Gotcha. So I think the first thing, a lot of men, and myself included, a couple of years ago, we tend to believe that if we think women are earning the same amount as men, if we think women should have agency over their own body, if we think that women should be able to walk out at night and not be harassed, if we believe those fundamental things, we're good people, we're good men. And to me, that's not enough. That's just the bare minimum. That doesn't make you an ally. Like I kind of said during our chat, it just makes you a not shitty person. Like that should be the bare necessities, that women should be paid the same as men for the same caliber of work. They should have agency over their own body. So what we men have to do is to go, okay, let's move that step further from supporter to ally. Supporter is a noun. If I believe women should earn the same, that's a noun. Allyship is a verb. Being an ally is a verb. And and we men need to examine, what are we doing to further the cause of feminism and the intersectionalities within feminism? It's not enough to just believe something. How can we use the tremendous privilege that we have? And there really is tremendous privilege in being a man. How can we use that to further the cause of feminism? And in the right environments, and when we're being asked to speak, how can we use our voice to advocate for women? Because, women speaking on their own behalf, there could be an inference of bias, because obviously women want to ensure they have agency. In the same way that me speaking about Black rights, I'm biased because I am Black. Whereas sometimes in the right context, and when they have been invited, a white person speaking on behalf of the Black community and saying like, this is a privilege I enjoy. White people, my fellow white people, I need you to understand, that can be powerful. And sometimes men speaking to men about women can equally be powerful. So I always encourage them, the sort of men in my life, and whenever I'm speaking to a predominantly male group, is to say, how can you use your privilege to ensure that the voices of women are heard in the right circumstances? But also, how are you taking individual responsibility to further the cause, in the same way that a white person might feel a little bit uncomfortable if they hear something racist and they don't jump in? Like, how are we men jumping into conversations where there are a group of men who are saying either sexist or derogatory things about women? And it happens all the time. And because statistically speaking as well, men tend to be in senior positions in a lot of industries at work. How are you diversifying your workforce, and how are you ensuring that women are starting to get the senior roles that they deserve within an organization?
Absolutely. And I think, Elijah, what's really interesting is the way you talk about championing women there, in terms of how can, as a male, how can you use your privilege, and taking individual responsibility is absolutely something that white people need to do, in terms of looking at people of colour too, because we all have that privilege in one way or another, and we all have that individual responsibility. I'm just going to very quickly move to the final question before we hand over to Rosemarie. So we have a minute or two. So Jay asked if, which I think is an absolutely brilliant question, if there's any advice you would give on how to tackle conversations when someone is speaking with biased or racist views. I think we've probably all been in that uncomfortable situation.
I think I'll be very quick with this. I think the good thing is, like, racism is the enemy, is the bad thing, and it's always easy to speak up against bad things. It's more difficult to speak about morally ambiguous things, but racism is not morally ambiguous. It's wrong, it's evil. And so, I always encourage people to feel empowered to be able to call out something that is wrong. Racism is just as wrong as murder, and you wouldn't comfortably sit in an environment where someone's like, oh, I just murdered someone yesterday. Like, you wouldn't sit there and like, oh, it's a bit awkward to say you shouldn't murder people. And I understand it can be difficult, and you're not going to get it right 100% of the time, nor should you feel like you have to. Like, we're human beings, we're fallible. But I would still always encourage you to do it, even if you can't do it in that moment, even if you have to go away and think about it and then come back to the individual who said the thing and say, hey, I've been thinking about what you said, and it doesn't quite resonate well because of this. I think that's okay too. And also, the most important thing that I've found is just the spirit of empathy, right? Being able to say to someone, hey, that thing that you said, how would you feel if someone said that about you or about the group that you inhibit? absence of the privilege, because we're all privileged in some circumstances and we're all underprivileged in others. So that spirit of empathy and being able to say, hey, you know what, you may not think that's right, but put yourself in someone else's shoes. How would you feel if they said that about you? And that for me is always an easier way to open the door to that conversation.
Absolutely. I think empathy there is key, Elijah, and the way that you've framed that, I think helps hopefully a lot of us have those conversations if we're in the very sad and unfortunate position of hearing those kind of comments. So Elijah, a huge thank you for sharing your experiences. I know I've certainly been on an eye-opening journey through my conversations with you, and if anyone is interested in hearing more of Elijah's thoughts, and he writes with such beautiful humor, I would honestly recommend you you read his book, The Clapback, because it's a joyous read. So thank you, Elijah. I'm now going to hand over to Rosemarie. So Rosemarie is an experienced change agent, coach and mentor, and she is a wonderfully firm advocate for women in technology, and through her work has supported and inspired not just numerous women but also people of colour. She uses a wonderful quote on her website, which for me really does kind of summarise the essence of today's session. And she says, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So Rosemarie, I'm delighted to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and thank you very much, London Tech Ladies, for having me back again. This is my second furore into speaking for London Tech Ladies. And Elijah, thank you so much for your candid, humorous approach and sharing practical tips as well. You've shared, some of your experiences and practical ways that we all on this call can learn. So thank you very much as well. So I'm going to follow you up with a little bit about me. And when I was asked to do this talk, I had to think about what could I do, how could I deliver something that was impactful, helpful, but also share some of what I am about, and some of my own experiences. And I decided to kind of strike a balance between sharing some of my stories, but also sharing what you can do from my perspective. It's obviously my perspective, it's not always the right perspective, but a perspective. So I want to start off with you. My experience of allowing people to understand what racism feels like, or being excluded feels like, is storytelling. So I'm going to share one of my stories with you, and let's see how that lands with you. So a few years ago, I went on a trip to the Neapolitan Riviera, which is in Italy. And I went with my partner, and we hired a car, and we had 3 weeks, and we were going to drive down the coast, go to Naples, Sorrento, Amalfi, Positano, etc., and then drive back and go back to the airport. Now, this is not that long ago, but it was a little bit before smartphones were so prevalent. So one of our first stops was in Sorrento on our way down the coast. And we went to a tourist information office, and we went in and we asked them, they had like a board where you could see which hotels had space, because we decided that we were going to be spontaneous. We didn't want to book hotels all in advance. So we went into this tourist information board and we said, do you have any hotels with a double room for us? And they sent us to a hotel just on the edge of town, on the edge of Sorrento. So when we got there, my partner went into the car. My partner went into the hotel. I stayed in the car, and he went inside. He checked, confirmed. Have you got a room? Yes, we do. Do you want to pay now? Would you like the key? No, not yet. I'm just going to get my girlfriend to check to see if she's okay with staying in this hotel. So I came along, toddled along, happily on my journey. Went inside, and the gentleman looked at. I'm still going to call him a gentleman. The gentleman looked at us, and he said, "Oh, I'm afraid I've made a mistake. We don't have a room." He was just about to give my partner the keys, right? What do you mean you don't have a room? We were checking, but you just said you had a room. This is weird. And at that moment, our hearts sank. We realized that we were victims of racism. So my partner is white, Caucasian Dutch, and I obviously came in secondly, and I am a Black woman. So we left, and we got into the car, and we didn't speak for a few minutes because we were both so incredibly shocked that this could happen. it was just, amazing that it could happen. We were like, we'd traveled, we've gone lots of places, and I love traveling, and this had never happened to us. And I looked at my partner finally, and he said, you know what, in this world, I actually did not realize racism existed. In that moment, I've learned something different. And that was an incredible turning point. So crazily enough, we had an amazing holiday, but that tainted my holiday. But listen to this bit. Somehow, glutton for punishment, on the way back, we decided to do the same thing. We said, maybe we got it wrong. Maybe he wasn't racist. So we did exactly the same thing. We went into the tourist board. Have you got any hotels? This one's still available. The story follows. My partner went in first, exactly the same thing. I came in secondly. I've made a mistake. No room at the inn. That was it. So I just want to share that story with you. And imagine you're on your amazing, incredible holiday, and you go into a hotel and you're looked at, and someone says to you, you cannot stay here because you've got blue eyes. You cannot stay here because you're wearing red nail polish. You cannot stay here because you've got blonde hair. You cannot stay here because you've got big hands. Just imagine any of those things that you're excluded. So I just want to share that story with you. Now, I'm a remarkably resilient person, and I always say that if someone's given you a gift, you have the option whether or not you want to accept that. Now, I could have said, I will never go back to Italy. And for a long time, I was very, very hesitant about going back to Italy, but I realized that not everybody is like that. So I've chosen that instead of hiding away and not doing the things that I want to do, I do speak up. I've always been quite outspoken. I've always been someone who's very confident, but I recognize that not everybody's like me. But I do share my stories, and I do speak up. If somehow I'm in the midst of racism, something happens to me, or any kind of exclusion for anybody, I will speak up for them. It's just my nature. It's just who I am, personally and professionally. But I guess I'm blessed to be able to do that. And I recognize that not everybody can do that. So now I want to share with you some practicalities. And Hannah, I'm going to talk. If you want to jump in, ask me any questions, please feel free. But I've kind of put some stuff together around practicalities that people could do in their workplace or in their personal lives as well. So dive in if you got any questions. Or
right, Rosemarie, would you like me to ask you questions now, or would you like to share some of your practicalities and then we'll move on to questions? It's completely up to you.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to share what I've got, given that we've got some time constraints as well. So
perfect, thank you. And then I'll ask questions after.
Okay. So as you've just heard, so that was just a story. That's a minor story in the great scheme of racism that's happening in the world right now. And racism is uncomfortable, it's nasty. As Elijah said, you wouldn't accept a murderer in your midst, so why would you accept a racist? It's not a pretty topic, and it's not an easy topic, but it's definitely a needed topic. We need to talk about it more, and we need to take more action. We've done a good job of hiding it for quite a long time, but it's out in the open. Let's just carry on the conversation, and let's see what we can do to change it and raise up our voices. So for me, there are times when extreme anger when it comes to racism is so understandable, but for me, mostly anger doesn't work for me. It defeats the object of where I'm trying to get to, what I'm trying to achieve. So I do try to balance that out. Sometimes I can't watch things because I do get so angry and saddened by and sickened by things, but I recognize that I have a voice, so I will use it. And for me in life, everybody's got a right to behave in a certain way until they know better. And that's what people do. If I don't share and educate and teach what is right from wrong, I know we should all know this, but we don't. So, I mean, we should all know racism is wrong is what I mean, but we don't. And everybody has the right or they're entitled to behave in a certain way until they know better. So for me, it's my job to help other people to know better. So the default human behavior is kind of like, if it doesn't affect me, it doesn't concern me, so I'm just going to leave it. And that's what people often do. They're like, oh, well, it's not my problem. or they don't really realize or recognize that they can do something. So I think it is our collective responsibility to stamp out racism. It is an everybody initiative. We can't do it on our own. You know, one Black person can't do it, and it's not the responsibility of Black people or people of color to stamp out racism. It's a collective responsibility. And my experiences are there are different types. There's different types of people in the world, and I'm going to well, obviously there's lots more different types, but there's 4 types. And when it comes to racism, those who are openly or quietly racist and intolerant, they're intolerant to anybody, everybody, racism, disabilities, sexual orientation, religion, they're just intolerant. Then there are people who are unaware or in denial. They're unaware that there's any kind of racism happening. And there's some people who are aware, but they don't know what to do. And then there's some on the receiving end, and they're exhausted, or they just can't be bothered. They've given up, or they're angry. So for me, if you're on this call, you're listening to the recording, or you're here now, you know, decide which type you are. You may be any of those types, and I'm going to say, but here's your opportunity to do something differently. And what is it that you're willing to do differently? So ask yourself, in the great scheme of things, what am I willing to do differently? You can't come on this call and say, well, it was nice, but I'm not going to do anything. You must take action after you leave today. That's really, really important. And stretch yourself. Just go a little bit further than what you'd normally do, even if it feels quite squeamish or uncomfortable. Just start, take a step. Being here is the first step. That's really brilliant. Don't do it alone. Get someone with you. Get someone talking. Either if it's race you're talking about, talk to another Black person. If you don't feel comfortable talking to another Black person or Black person, talk to someone in your circle that you're comfortable with speaking to. And then start talking about, what can I do? How can I be an advocate of stamping out racism? But that's really important. And some other things that you can do, you know, if you do see it happening, and exactly what Elijah said, the empathetic approach. So if you don't know how to call it out, some people are just like, call it out, whoa, that was just proper racist. But if you can't quite find that voice, ask the person who's making the comments or making the underhand slide comments, or say to them, how would you feel if that was about you? Put yourself in that person's shoes. Or how do you think that person perceived what you said? How do you think you made that person feel? So these are just some of the ways that you can start talking about and calling people out quietly or noisily, whichever you prefer. Imagine that if you're observing it, imagine how the person on the receiving end feels. You know, if it's uncomfortable for you, imagine how uncomfortable it is for someone being abused or insulted. And then you've got the open racism, but you've also got the microaggressions, which we'll probably talk a little bit more about later. But this starts your journey of calling it out. This starts your journey of becoming an advocate and an ally, whichever word you want to, a champion, whatever word you want to use for yourself, that's you're comfortable with. I want to encourage you also to keep reading and listening to people's stories, because that's when you start becoming even more empathetic and understanding what you can do to advocate change. Find an ally. If you're working in an organization, and if it is or can be racist or it's not particularly inclusive, find someone who you can have that shared conversation with, so that you can do it together if you don't have the courage to do it on your own. And the more we talk about this, as I was saying, the more we talk about this, the more we're able to actually take action. We can do more. You know, unfortunately, it's taken what's happened in the US, but this has been happening for decades. You know, this is nothing new. You know, we're doing it more noisily now, you know, protests going on, and it had to come to this, unfortunately. But now there's pockets of advocates popping up, let's say, and you don't have to go to Trafalgar Square. You don't have to raise your banner if that's not for you. You know, find your style and do it your way, but make sure you do something, even if it's a small thing. Make sure you do something to stand up against racism. And yeah, do it in your style. Don't pick up on whatever just because someone else is doing it this way. I feel bad, so I'm going to do it the same way. And the other thing is, like, it is uncomfortable, and if you're not comfortable, if you kind of squirming around, that's what shows. So it's likely that you will say the wrong thing. So before you get to that stage, what you can do is say, look, this is really new to me. I don't really know what I'm saying. I've got no idea how to say this. And I'm really sorry if I get this wrong, but I want to ask you X, or can you tell me some, why, whatever it is. But just be honest, just be open. And you'll see if that person is willing to receive you. You'll know if you're around that person, if they're the type of person that will embrace your questions, as long as it comes from good and decent intentions, which is exactly what Hannah said from the beginning. If your intention is malicious, then that's what's gonna come across. So if you have good intentions, that you want to do the right thing, you don't know what to say, you might get it wrong, just find someone who is understanding, who's objective, who will help you to find your own words and find your own voice. Because the last thing I'd want you to do is say, I'm so scared, I'm so scared of doing the wrong thing or saying the wrong thing, I'm not going to do anything. That's the last thing I would want. So as I said, it's our collective responsibility. It's an everybody initiative. We've got to do this all together. So that's really, really important. So that's what I'd like to share with you. I could probably go on a bit more, but I'm just going to keep the time. And, these are my perspectives. I have never allowed racism to stop me doing what I want to do in life. But I've also seen firsthand it stopping other people from getting where they want in life. So I do understand it, and I'm very empathetic in terms of those people who have been held back by it. That's why I want to be an advocate as well, to make a difference and make a change. So that's just a little bit about me. So I'm happy to answer questions later along with Elijah.
Rosemary, thank you so much. I mean, honestly, I'm just looking at the messages coming through on chat in response to your incredibly honest and harrowing story. And I think one of the things that you said that really resonates is, imagine if that was you. And I just cannot imagine living in a world where that happens, but it is happening. And just to share very quickly some of the chat, because lots of people saying they've had similar experiences, which is just quite frankly shocking. And somebody saying that they had a similar experience where they asked to use a toilet and was told that her husband, who was mixed race, couldn't, yet when she appeared, who's white, was suddenly told that he could. Somebody else who's gay and trans and has been called out for wearing red nail varnish, which is just hideous. Just so many of these awful stories. And I think, as you said, the kind of key thing here is sharing our stories and understanding that, and then asking yourself, as you said, Rosemary, what are you going to do differently? So I think hopefully everyone's taken an awful lot from that. We have just under 20 minutes to now move on to a Q&A session. So I can see that there are lots of great questions that people have already been asking, and please feel free, and I'm going to try and ask as many of those questions and answers, ask as many of those questions as I possibly can in the next 20 minutes to both Rosemary and Elijah. So let's go on to, first of all, Rosemary, you talk about the work that you've done with organisations to tackle racism within their systems. So what initiatives have companies taken that is successful or the right way forward, that you've seen as kind of being a good way, a positive way that companies have made changes, which hopefully, for all of us that work for companies, we can take some of that back to companies if we feel that actually their culture isn't particularly inclusive?
Thank you. So one of the biggest ways that I've seen improvements are, the first thing is it's got to be a top-down and bottom-up approach. It's got to be a company culture. As Wells Fargo, really, that was not a company culture that was being inclusive. They're probably doing some lip service with inclusion, but they're not really advocating for it. So the first thing is to ask your employees what they want. So you've got to get the feedback from them. You've got to get the engagement from the employees, because you may think you're running an organization, that is open and honest and inclusive, but it's not. So one of the things I've seen work really well is having both forums, but employee engagement. So where they've asked what is going on, specific sets of questions around feedback, surveys, etc. Anonymity. I always get that word wrong. And then they can start to hear what they need to change. And from there, great unconscious bias training is good, but it doesn't make a difference if it's just one-off. So you've got to go into organizations and make a difference in terms of follow up, different sessions, workshops around, one of the things that I run workshops on is around emotional intelligence. And my experience, if you just improve a fraction of your emotional intelligence, that would open you to be much less biased, because we all make assumptions, we all make biases every single day about race, sex, gender, experiences all the time. So that's one of the things that's really, really important, emotional intelligence, and those types of initiatives and workshops, they work really well too.
Thank you, Rosemarie. Just as a quick reminder to everybody, you can vote on the questions that have already been posed by our audience. So in order to keep with the time, we are choosing the ones first that have had the most votes. So please go ahead and vote for them. So I'm going to ask this question to Elijah, and Rosemarie, fabulous if you can contribute too. So Elijah, do you believe in positive discrimination early on in the recruitment process to make sure there are more diverse candidates being looked at? And how do you reconcile that with the viewpoint that this is just filling a quota, or is not, and it's not just finding the right person for the job?
So I tend not to think about it in terms of positive discrimination. I tend to think about it in terms of addressing a wrong, a societal wrong. If I create a company and I want that company to reflect the diversity of society, but it doesn't, then the positive actions that I take to address that is not positive discrimination. There's something wrong happening. And so I'm trying to address that thing that's wrong. If I went to the doctor with a headache, if I went to the emergency room or A&E with a headache, and someone else came in with a broken arm, if the doctor addressed the broken arm before they got to my headache, that's not positive discrimination. That problem is more severe. So I think when trying to get more people of color into the organization, especially at an early age or early in their career, so that they can build up their experience and they can grow in the company, I think it's so important, especially when you tend to think even larger than your company in terms of like systemic discrimination in education, in healthcare. So actually being positive in terms of trying to get more people of color, I think is just addressing a societal wrong. And it works both ways. Like if I had a company full of Black people and I wanted my company to reflect the diversity of society, then it means that I would need to get people of other races and other experiences as well. And I think that's probably one of the issues that we run into in society, of just trying to think, oh, we're doing Black people a favor by trying to get more of them into the company. It's like, no, these individuals deserve to be here. What we're doing is creating opportunities that have been previously closed to people who look like that, who sound like that, who are from that background. And so we're just trying to address that wrong that has been done.
Absolutely. Thank you, Elijah. Rosemarie, anything that you would like to add to that?
No, I echo exactly what Elijah's saying. You've got to make sure that the opportunities are there, that you're creating the opportunities. It's not if you allow everybody across the board into your organization, regardless of their background, ethnicity, orientation, sexual orientation, religion, etc., and their, specifically their race, if you give them more opportunities, that's not positive discrimination, because you're now just opening the doors to allow people who previously were not given those opportunities, you're now saying, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Welcome, come in, join our team, join our gang. You're welcome to come into the gang, so to speak. So, yeah.
Thank you. Absolutely. So another question we have here, how do you prepare your children at an early age to handle the brutality and reality of racism without damaging their young minds? Rosemarie, if I start with you and then I'll move over to Elijah.
Wow,
that's a powerful one, right?
Powerful question. And I've seen, I don't know if anyone's seen this, the brown eye, blue eye debate by, was it Jane Elliott? Look it up on YouTube, or we'll share the link afterwards. It's a very simple experiment about having young people in a room with saying, today we're going to exclude you, we're going to be nasty to you because you've got brown eyes, and tomorrow we're going to do that for the people with blue eyes, and showing them that being nasty to people just because they're slightly different is mean, it's horrible, and it makes you feel really bad. Now, I think, children are quite resilient. So when they grow, they will see the world how they want to. I'm not saying be mean to them, but I do think it's important to be reasonably open without showing them devastating images that will shock them and really take their innocence away. But having conversations, even about what's been going on in the US, having a conversation about this happened. This person was shot because he was Black. This man, having those conversations, I think, but without making them feel absolutely terrified. There's a way to use the language to share with them. But I'm very honest, and I do believe in being open. And I know people will disagree with me, which is fine. That's why we're here. But I don't think that you need to shelter them completely until they're really old. I mean, if it affects them, you don't have to necessarily wave it under their nose, but it's a conversation that we need to have, especially with people of color, with young Black children, because when they do go out into the world, and if they do experience racism, it won't be such a shock to them, and you'll have start helping them to as they grow older, how they can navigate the world when this does happen to them, or if it does happen. Hopefully it doesn't, but if it does happen, what they can do. And rather than responding with shock and anger, they have more tools to be able to navigate the circumstances, and that could be helpful. So that's just one perspective.
Thank you, Rosemarie. And Elijah?
Yeah, I would love to echo what Rosemarie said. And I don't have any kids, so I can't speak from experience. But what I do know is that racism is a learned behavior. Like, no one's born racist. So if it's learned, it can be unlearned. And so being able to teach children of all races about racism and preparing them for what the future might be, you're just giving them a really good foundation so that they don't have to learn it later on. And for anyone who's read my book, I like to use metaphors. Some people say, oh, we shouldn't talk to children about racism because, it may scar them. But we talk to our children about not talking to strangers. That doesn't stop them from making friends, So being able to talk to them about racism doesn't mean you scar them for life. It means you prepare them for life. And so, every parent has their own style of parenting. And so it's up to them to decide how to have that conversation. But I do think it's a conversation worth having and just putting them on the right path to life.
Agreed. There's for anyone that hasn't seen it, there was a fabulous documentary on Channel 4, The School That Tried to End Racism, and I would highly recommend anybody watching that. So thank you both. I'm going to ask a couple more questions before we wrap up. So please keep your questions coming. So we have another question, which is, how do you approach the unconscious bias when you can see that this is clearly being applied to the recruitment process, but the person hiring has no idea that they're doing it? So Elijah, shall I hand over to you first, and then Rosemarie, you could add to that.
I mean, the kind of, it sounds really weird to say it, so I'm going to say it in a colloquial way, is the kind of good thing when it comes to race and the absence of it in the office is very visual, it's very visible. Like I can, unlike, you know, LGBTQ plus or people who are differently abled, those are not always visible. And even race is not always visible, but by and large, like you can look at me and tell I'm a black man. So it's very easy to have that conversations to go, it's been a week and I have only been in 2 meetings where there were people of color. Like that is empirical evidence that you can either go to recruitment or HR or managers and go, we need to make a change. It's very, very visible. And unconscious bias is definitely a thing. And, you know, recruiters might just go, okay, I'm looking at the most qualified individuals from the most qualified universities. But then statistically speaking, people of color don't get the same admission rates as white people. So if you're getting lots of CVs from top universities, if you're a recruiter who may have blinders on, you might just go, oh, but I'm just bringing in the best people. So to me, it's very easy to have those conversations compared to, you know, sexuality or disability, where you can just say, I need you to just open your eyes and look across the company. And it's not, you know, in an accusatory way, but just being able to say, we have 10 board members and all of them are white. You know, what I used to do in my old company was just take the company photo and go to the HR manager and just go, hey, just out of curiosity, is there anything that strikes you different about this photo? And if it's like full of, I work in PR, so the gender parity is not the same as it is in tech overall, but it's very easy to look at it from a racial perspective and go, okay, something doesn't quite add up here. And I think that helps you have those conversations with individuals who maybe have an unconscious bias, is just showing them evidence of it and just be like, hey, how has it been this company's existed for 10 years and I'm the only black person, or there's only 5 of us out of 500? And those help you have those conversations. And again, it leads into empathy, right? Because if I give you statistics, if I go, oh, like 20% are black people, well, okay, fine, but then that may be like only 5% are people of Southeast Asian origin. Whereas if I show you a picture where you can actually see the color palette and then just see that it's predominantly of one race, I think that just makes having that conversation a lot easier.
Absolutely. Thank you, Elijah. It's I'd like to just hand that over to Rosemarie very quickly. And there's one final question that I would like to ask, which I think is very important given what is going on in the world right now. So Rosemarie, just over to you to if there's anything that you would like to add to that with Elijah.
Yeah. So just to top up what Elijah said, he's already done the pictures speak 1,000 words. So the other thing that you can add with that is I'm a big fan of asking questions, because only when you ask self-reflective, open questions, obviously I'm a coach, people can start to see what they're doing and what they could change. And so one of the questions would be, what is our diversity and inclusion policy? How are we ensuring that filters into the organization? How does that fit in with our culture? How do you see that fitting in with our culture at present? So that's an opportunity for the person to look up HR or wherever, to look up and look around saying, yeah, you might have a point there. And just that whole process of starting to look at the organization through different lenses as well, because sometimes people just don't see it. I don't know why, but they just don't see it. So they don't realize what can be changed or how they can be more inclusive. So we think that in HR or CEOs, they should be looking at their organization, especially with D&I making such a big mark on the organizations. But sometimes they're too busy, whatever, they just don't see it. So sometimes you need to highlight it to them in a little bit more of an obvious way, like calling out not yearbooks, but your corporate photos as well and stuff like that, and your website. Look at your company website. Yeah, that's a good one.
100%. hopefully that's something that we're all going to feel much more comfortable doing after today's event. So this is the last question. I'm conscious that there's only a couple of more minutes left and we need to wrap up. So, but I just want to commend the bravery of somebody for asking this, because as we said at the beginning, this is a safe place and we want people to be honest in their questions. This person has written, I'm conscious about asking this, but here goes. I'd like to be the best ally I can, but I'm very concerned about all the attempts to raise racial consciousness within anti-racism, as it's very likely to increase racism and prejudice. I've been prompted a lot over the last months to think and judge myself and others explicitly through race. I'm concerned about this because I have observed how this is extremely problematic behaviour when examining other political groups. Shouldn't we be attempting to destroy the concept of race rather than establish it further? So guys, I think we could debate for hours, and I'm very conscious of the time, but Elijah, perhaps if you could answer that question, and then Rosemarie, I could hand over to you for a very kind of quick summary and answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's long since been held and believed that race is nothing other than a social construct. We are one species, human beings, Homo sapiens. There's just one of us, and every credible scientist believes that and understands that. And you know, the reason why I have darker skin and Hannah has lighter skin is because, you know, my ancestors decided to stay in Africa where it is hot and the sun shines a lot. And to protect my ancestors from ultraviolet light, they developed darker skin. Whereas Hannah's ancestors most likely moved to Scandinavia where it is not as hot. And in order to better absorb vitamin D, her ancestors developed lighter skin. That is it. That is it. And every credible scientist holds that to be true. I think what's most important to talk about is that even though race is a social construct, someone constructed it. Someone decided to go, we're going to start treating people differently than others. And I think in any anti-racist conversation that we need to have, we need to first start from the point of racism is an illegitimate concept. It is not valid. It has no roots in truth. And it's only when we accept that we can then move on to how can we deal with it? Again, to use a metaphor, you know, if a group of doctors came together and it's like, oh, how can we treat malaria? You first have to understand that is a disease caused by mosquitoes and not a curse that some witch has put on you. And, you know, and it's only when you understand the problem and the root of the problem that you can deal with it. So yes, I do understand the concerns that Black and white people are fundamentally different at a genetic level, creeping into those conversations. And we just have to stamp that out because it really has no basis. Superior by Angela Saini is a great book to read. How to Argue with a Racist by Adam Rutherford is another fantastic book to read. But yes, we just have to stamp it out because it's an illegitimate concept. It has no basis in truth.
Great, thank you, Elijah. Rosemarie, I'm so sorry, but we are out of time, and I do just want to wrap up because.
Sorry, Rosemarie, I spoke too long.
No, Elijah, everything you said was so important and so valid, and the same for you, Rosemarie. I just hope that everybody today has taken one thing that they can, as Rosemarie said earlier, that they can do differently moving forward. Elijah, you mentioned lots of great books there, and Rosemarie, I know you have some brilliant answers in terms of how can we do things differently, how can we do some more practical things and better things to educate ourselves. So for everybody that's attended this session and signed up for it, we are going to be following up with an email with all of those resources for you to be able to see that. So very, very quickly, we are planning our next event, which will be in October, with COVID, Christmas approaching. I think everybody's probably feeling that financial pinch. So there's going to be lots of practical advice in our financial planning event. So please keep an eye out on your emails. There's lots of ways to keep in contact with us. Guys, the stories and information you've been putting on the chat today has just been eye-opening and incredibly powerful, and there's definitely a lot there that we want to be sharing and talking about. So please, let's keep this conversation going through Facebook, Instagram, and we welcome any questions and feedback that you have. And finally, Elijah and Rosemarie, would love to hear from you guys. So any questions you have, anything you would like to discuss further, please reach out to them. So huge thank you to everyone today for attending. I've learned a lot from Elijah and Rosemarie, and I hope you guys have too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay.